Hello, welcome to another edition of Labor's Worldview TV. I'm your host, David Johnson. Today we have a very special guest with us who's actually running for U.S. Congress. Could you introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yes, my name is Stefanie Smith. I am a resident of Urbana, Illinois. I'm from Leroy, Illinois, and I am running in Illinois District 13.
And that's a pretty big district, isn't it? It goes from Urbana all the way down close to East St. Louis?
Yeah, it's almost like a strip across the middle of the southern, central southern state. It is a very, very large district. We've got Champaign, Urbana, Decatur, Springfield, parts of Bloomington Normal. So yes, very large. Contains a lot of rural population as well.
Okay. So what motivated you to run for U.S. Congress? Are there any issues in particular that you felt needed to be addressed that other politicians haven't been addressing?
Yes, actually, that's why I'm running, is that I didn't feel like I was seeing a lot of issues being discussed that directly impact our district. I've done a lot of work in the community around lower income and homeless individuals, and kind of looking at our social safety nets and the amount of poverty, housing insecurity, and food insecurity we suffer in our district. And not seeing any candidates talk about that left me feeling very, very concerned, because I think that we need to have those issues prioritized on a federal level if we are actually going to serve the people in our district.
Okay. And what are some specific issues that you feel like you need to focus on?
So as far as federal issues that I think nobody is really talking about across the board is SESTA FOSTA. So it's a little bit confusing because FOSTA was passed in 2017 with bipartisan support, signed into law by Donald Trump, and it's a bill to end sex trafficking. And you would think, that's great, nobody wants sex trafficking. However, it is actually a censorship bill. So it expands federal criminal law to target online platforms for user-generated content. So this means that sex work and related topics are being censored off of the internet, including things involving harm reduction. And it opens up platforms to criminal and civil penalties. One of the effects that people are really familiar with is the overnight disappearance of Craigslist personal ads, because Craigslist was fearing that they could be criminally indicted if somebody were to post a personal that was actually an offer for some sort of sexual service. Then Craigslist has liability there. So it basically erodes Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. That act states, no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another content provider. So if we were to frame this not in the internet, but in the real world, that would be like saying a library is responsible for every word written in every book that they carry. And if there's anything criminal contained in any of the books, then the library could be criminally penalized.
That's really disturbing. I mean, I could see that could really be used, horribly against all sorts of, political dissent in particular.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, it was originally that Section 230 was meant to protect people like Facebook users, bloggers, making them so that they're not liable for comments left on their blogs, right? So reviews are another thing that have a weird protection in here that could possibly be eroded. So if you were to write a critical review of something on Amazon, for example, then if we don't have this Section 230 in place, Amazon could be penalized for anything criminal that was discussed in a review even. but the chilling effect does come in when we're talking about platforms hyper-correcting for this out of fear, and so they just start blanket banning any sort of sexual content or any sort of, it could be used eventually for dissent if we see the criminalization of political speech. We're seeing the beginnings of that right now in the ways people are talking about like anti-fascism movements and that sort of thing. There's already a push for that, and so this would allow that to pretty easily be subjected to these weakened Section 230 amendments.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that one thing you've been really involved in was fighting against food insecurity as well as housing insecurity. That seems to be another issue that you're needing to focus on. You don't think has gotten enough attention?
Yes, and this is a deeply personal issue for me because I was homeless off and on growing up. I've spent my entire life in and out of poverty, and I've accumulated enough student loan debt and medical debt that that will likely be my destiny for quite some time. So I have actually endorsed the People's Action's Homes Guarantee policy. It is a plan that incorporates building 12 million social housing units as a way to eradicate homelessness. It calls for reinvesting in public housing. It helps protect renters and bank tenants. Bank tenants is a specific term within the policy, meaning homeowners, especially victims of predatory lending, who are basically paying more on their house than it's worth. So they're just kind of underwater all the time. So even if they sell their homes, they're still not, they can't get out of it. There's land and real estate speculation that they would like to end. They would like to stop the commodification of housing. It's in a housing as a human rights model. And I believe that that's really important in our district because right now, across the nation, 12 million renter households are extremely cost burdened, extremely rent burdened. That means they pay 50% or more of their income to rent. In our district, District 13, 56% of renters are rent burdened. So that means they pay 30%, more than 30% of their income to rent. But 36% are severely rent burdened. That's within our district. In Urbana, 68% of our people are rent burdened, and 47% of households are severely rent burdened. This means that our population here in Champaign-Urbana, the numbers for Champaign are 59% rent burdened, 41% severely rent burdened. So in our cities here and throughout our district, so many of us are just like one misstep or one bad day, one emergency situation away from being homeless. This is unacceptable. You can't have a life if you're worried about home stability. You have to be able to have a home. You have to be able to have food. If you're paying over half of your income to rent, you're not going to have as much money for food. You're not going to have as much money to stimulate local economies. You're not going to be able to afford a change of tires, which might impact your ability to go to work. And you're probably going to be working multiple jobs if you're already paying over half of your income to your rent. You have to compensate for that somewhere. So all of these things kind of work together to create a destabilizing situation, especially for families, because you have like the added issues of childcare, which is also extremely expensive and a huge barrier to being able to work jobs to be able to afford housing and
Yeah,
food.
those are some shocking statistics. I had no idea it was that high in Champaign-Urbana, much less throughout the district. In terms of childcare, what would you think would be a good solution as far as making it people that are struggling to be able to have affordable childcare?
Yeah, I believe that childcare, we absolutely need federal programs that provide more assistance for childcare. When we don't provide affordable childcare, even when we have two-family households, you wind up having one member that usually has to give up their career in order to take care of the children because it's cheaper than getting childcare. But when you have single parents or you have households in which somebody has a disability and they can't work, it becomes so cost prohibitive that the only options that become available are relying on our social safety nets like nutritional assistance and voucher-based housing and disability payments, and all of those things are already not in line with inflation and rising home costs. So really any sort of federal program that would allow for child care coverage is going to make for a healthier economy, and it's going to make for a more engaged population in general, because then people have the opportunity to work. They have the opportunity to make their money and go to events and do things in their community, get engaged. Children need to have stability in child care. If somebody can't afford child care on the regular, you're going to be bouncing children around in precarious situations. So all of these things strengthen our communities and are really necessary for safety and stability across the board.
Besides, and sort of under the category of housing, I also heard you talk, when I heard you speak a while back about asset forfeiture, and that's something that I've been kind of aware of, but I guess I wasn't as aware of the issue as I thought I was, and it seems like a lot of people don't even know about this issue until it adversely affects them.
Yes, that is a really big issue. From 2010 to 2017, Illinois brought in $226 million from civil asset forfeiture. And so a lot of that is related to drug crimes and trafficking. But I recently learned at the Champaign Public Library, the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting had a talk there, and I learned that oftentimes police will actually let drug smugglers and traffickers bring the product into communities, and they will catch them as they leave because cash is a liquid asset that's easier for them to spend. Otherwise, they have to convert the drugs into money. So it's not doing what it was designed to do, but the people actually most affected by this are poor people. It disproportionately affects people of color. What happens is if somebody is, let's say they're pulled over and they're like, oh, we suspect there might be drugs involved. So they seize their car.
Even if they don't find anything?
Correct. They don't have to find anything in order to seize that. If they take the person and arrest them, the person does not have to be convicted for them to seize the assets. They take the assets first. Only 1 in 6 of those sort of stops land in a conviction, but they're not required to give the assets back.
So somebody basically was neither indicted, or if they were indicted were found not guilty, exonerated, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to get back your property that they basically stole from you?
So it's illegal to seize property in a criminal conviction. That's why it's civil asset forfeiture. So in a criminal case, you can be given a public defender if you're poor. For a civil case, you get no such defender. So it becomes very costly time-consuming and almost impossible without paying a lawyer to go through civil courts to actually get your property back. And so that's where it becomes a trap for poor people, is that they can have their cars, their homes, their entire livelihood stolen, and there's no recourse. One of the most disturbing aspects of this for me is that police use this to buy things that are not worked into their approved budgets. John Oliver had a segment. It was an officer from Missouri speaking about it, and he referred to the money as they use it to buy toys with their pennies from heaven.
And their toys are?
Their toys are military-grade weapons.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me. That's why I was wanting to get clarification on that. Well, this kind of ties into what is your position on the federal legalization of marijuana and the war on drugs in general?
The war on drugs is just another way to criminalize poverty and to assign individual blame when what we have are systemic problems. People are suffering, they're in pain, whether that be emotionally, mentally, or physically. Drugs ameliorate pain. And if people don't have access to health care or therapies that would benefit them, they're going to use the tools that they have available. And so street drugs are oftentimes the only tools available to people that are experiencing extreme poverty. So federally, I believe that marijuana should be legalized. We have dispensaries, we have states that have it, and there are people that are still suffering because of the war on drugs for doing exactly what Bob is doing now in California at a dispensary that looks like an Apple store. So I think that's really, really important. But I'm actually for decriminalizing drug use, not sales. But across the board, I believe that we need to start viewing drug use as a physical and mental health problem that requires medical treatment, not punitive incarceration.
Okay. Well, that kind of leads into, since you mentioned medical treatment, what is your position on the Medicare for All bill in the House and the Senate currently?
Healthcare is a human right. There is absolutely no reason, especially when it is our tax dollars that fund our medical advances, that fund the prescription drugs that we get, that fund all of these advances. No one should be denied access to the fruits of that labor that they have contributed to. If we have the ability to treat people, it's immoral not to. And nobody should have to be buried under debt just because they got sick. This is more of a disruption to our families and our communities. If somebody gets cancer, they shouldn't have to lose their house. They shouldn't have to lose their car. They shouldn't have to lose everything that has brought them stability. Like, they need to be focused on healing, right? And right now, our healthcare, it's sick care, right? Like, a lot of us, we only go to the doctor when we're very near death. That puts a strain on resources like emergency rooms, right? When there are actual emergencies, you've got people that are using emergency rooms because they've caught the flu and they don't have a regular doctor and they don't have access to preventative care. And there are so many ways that when we only have sick care and not health care, we strain all of our systems across the board.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that you had in the past had some school debt, from university attendance.
Yes.
What is your? And there's been bills or people suggesting bills to eliminate student debt. Basically, bail out people who have student debts, which will be a lot less than what it cost to bail out banks back in 2009.
Right.
And I sort of connected to that issue. Free post-high school education, because if you had free post-high school education, whether it be for university, community college, or technical or trade school, you wouldn't have student debt to begin with. So what's kind of your position on that issue, which I kind of linked together?
Right. Yeah. So we are crippling an entire generation and locking them out of the rites of passage of getting older, home ownership, starting families. Many of us don't even own cars. Student debt is it's astronomically out of proportion to what it has been historically. It used to be that you could work a summer job and pay your way through school. It's not the case now. I have tens of thousands of dollars and I went to a public university. So for me, I think that the biggest issue is that we have set up our society in a way that for an entry-level job that pays about $12 an hour, you're required to go to school for a degree that might cost you $30,000 or more. $30,000 being, I believe, the median level of debt that my generation carries. That's unfair. That's not something that we can get out of. If you want a healthy economy, you need this aspect of public service, right? Like you have to have an educated and engaged society. You have to have jobs that pay enough to live. And we've got people that straight out of the gate, as soon as they're done with their education, they're buried so far under debt and they can't get high-paying jobs that they're destitute. We have a highly educated, destitute, nearly homeless population of students. So that ties back into the housing insecurity and food insecurity. All of these things are very much related. But one of the most interesting aspects of student debt is those things that I am talking about are really scary, and people know that. And they drive a lot of people to the military as a means of avoiding debt. So I see why there's such a vested interest in keeping student debt the way that it is, because it has made the entire millennial generation start looking at the military as a means of avoiding that. But those wars don't usually serve our people. They're oftentimes wars that serve a very small class of people, usually looking at Saudi Arabia and those issues going on right now. We're talking about another war for oil, a destabilizing Middle East war. We've done that a couple of times already in my lifetime, and I'm not that old. So I'm kind of sick of this rerun, and I'm really sick of people like me being used as cannon fodder for wars that don't benefit anyone.
Okay. What about public education? I mean, we're talking about, other than university, K through 12. Do you feel that it's important for a society to have a strong public education system?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And right now, this ties back into student loans. You expect teachers to get master's degrees, advanced degrees, and then take a job for $35,000, where classroom sizes in many places are double what they should be to effectively teach. They have to spend their money out of pocket to get supplies. And now they're expected to use their bodies as human shields and study combat tactics as well, all for $35K a year. We really need to value our teachers, and we need to value education. I'm really disappointed with the lack of civics taught in our schools. I'm a bit of a weird case because growing up, experiencing poverty and homelessness was very disruptive to me having access to school. So I graduated 8th grade, and then I went to my freshman year a little bit, and not much beyond that until I got my GED. But most people that I know actually have no sense of civics, and it's not taught in the schools like it should be, and that you really need that for a healthy, engaged population. And I believe that public school is the place that those things should be taught. We need to be taught life skills, like how to do taxes. That should be part of public education. We need to be taught how to live. We need actual skills. We do a lot of memorizing and a lot of standardized testing, and we come out with people that can take tests, but they don't know the first thing about how to make a budget for their household, for example.
All right, good point. What's your opinion about the right of workers to unionize?
That again ties back into almost everything we've been talking about, right? Like, people have to be able to have access to a living wage. That gets you access to housing, living wage, affordable housing, food. Those things are like, those are the 3 pillars that people absolutely need in order to meet like their base level needs. And so I believe that unionizing for labor rights is incredibly important right now, because jobs are getting more and more predatory. I think about, we've got workers striking right now, and they just got their health care ripped away. People waking up from surgery, finding out that their hospital bills are no longer going to be covered. That ties back into Medicare for all. We could take that bargaining chip away from corporations if we wanted to. People should not have to die because they're not getting a living wage and their boss is holding their health insurance ransom. That's horrible.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you wanted to touch on or tell the viewers about that we haven't covered?
I think the most important thing is this notion of civic engagement. I really, really want to see more people in our communities, in our district, go to their city council meetings, go to your county board meetings, figure out what they're doing, figure out what those positions are, figure out how they relate to your concerns in life. If you have issues with housing, you might be surprised how much city council and county boards control in that regard. And it's so important to make your voice heard. I know it's really hard when you're feeling really beaten down in every direction, but this is a path to change, right? But there's no one federal policy that can do it. There's no one state law that can do it. This has to happen on multiple levels, and the most important level is organizing and coming together within our smaller communities to start making the change there. That's where we're going to be the most impactful.
Okay, well, thank you for coming in today. And is there any, you have a website or Facebook page that people can find out more information about you, your issues?
Stefanie2020.com. My name's spelled with an F, but I bought both domains because I knew that would be an issue. And I am on Facebook, and I've recently learned how to tweet. So it's a little bit rocky there. So if you want to see me shakily go into that world, you can follow me. It's at Steph4Congress, the number 4.
Okay, well, thank you very much
Yeah.
for coming in.
Thank you.